Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going down a rabbit hole where UFOs, technology, and religion all kind of smash together.
Oh, yeah, definitely a rabbit hole. And we're using this book, American Cosmic, by Diana Pasulka. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah. It's really interesting. She's an academic, but she spent years talking to all kinds of people, like scientists who are studying UFOs and people who believe they've actually encountered them, even religious figures who are trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, she kind of goes all over the place with it, but that's what makes it so fascinating, you know? It really makes you question what's real and what's not.
For sure. So are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so Pasoka starts by introducing us to this concept of meta-experiencers.
Meta-experiencers.
Yeah, it sounds kind of complicated, but it basically means scientists who are studying people who have had UFO experiences.
Oh, okay, so they're not the ones having the experiences. They're studying the people who are.
Exactly. And two of the scientists she focuses on are Tyler D., who works in the space industry, and James Master, a leading scientist in his field.
So both of them are coming at this from a scientific perspective, but they both have this fascination with UFOs.
Right. And their paths to this fascination are completely different.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, Tyler's driven by this really personal experience. A memory he believes was implanted in his mind, which led him to make incredible advancements in technology.
Wow. A memory implant. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? And then you have James, who's been experiencing unexplained phenomena his whole life, and he's using his scientific background to try and find proof for what he's always felt to be true.
So it's like they're approaching the same mystery from two totally opposite ends of the spectrum.
That's so cool.
It is.
And it really highlights the different ways people come to this topic. So let's start with Tyler. Can you tell me more about this memory implant? He actually believes it was a download of information from some external source.
A download, like from a computer.
Kinda.
Yeah.
But more like a direct transfer of knowledge into his brain. And this download supposedly led him to this groundbreaking technological discovery.
Wow, so he's saying aliens gave him the secret to some amazing tech.
Not necessarily aliens, but some kind of external intelligence. And it was so significant that he actually quit his job to devote himself to this new knowledge.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So what kind of technology are we talking about?
Pasulka doesn't go into specifics, but she does mention that Tyler developed this thing called the 8+1 sleep protocol.
8+1 sleep protocol. What's that?
It's this routine he follows where he sleeps for 8 hours, then wakes up for an hour to meditate and try to receive more of these downloads.
So he thinks he can just tune in and get more information whenever he wants.
That's what he believes.
Yeah.
And it raises all these questions about the nature of inspiration and innovation.
Like, where do our ideas come from? Are we really in control, or are we just receivers picking up signals from somewhere else?
Exactly. It's mind-blowing stuff. Now let's shift gears and talk about James. He's this top scientist who suddenly finds himself pulled towards UFO research.
What happened?
Well, James has had a lifetime of unusual experiences.
Yeah.
Starting in childhood, he reported seeing little people experiencing sleep paralysis and even a potential encounter with the Men in Black.
Wait, Men in Black, like the movie?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? But these events instilled in him this deep desire to find a scientific explanation for what most people would consider unexplainable.
So even though he's a scientist, he's open to the possibility of things that we don't fully understand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And eventually he joins this secretive research group where they're grappling with the age-old question, are these phenomena psychological? Or are they evidence of something extraterrestrial?
Oh, so even among scientists studying UFOs, there's no consensus. It's like the mystery just keeps getting deeper.
For sure. And it gets even more complicated when you factor in things like James's fear of open windows.
His fear of open windows, what does that have to do with UFOs?
It might seem random, but it actually stems from his childhood experiences.
Really?
Oh.
How so?
Well, he won't go into the details, but he says that his fear is connected to those early encounters he had. And it just highlights how these events can shape our fears and behaviors even years later.
That's pretty profound. I mean, it makes you wonder how much of our adult lives is influenced by things we experienced as kids, things we might not even remember consciously.
It's a really interesting point, and it leads us to another concept that James explores in his research, anomalous cognition.
Anomalous cognition, what is that?
It's basically the ability to perceive or know things beyond our normal senses. like being able to sense things that are happening far away or even in the future.
So like ESP or something?
Kind of.
Yeah.
James believes he's experienced this himself, and he even uses it to try and explain some of the unexplained events reported by military personnel.
Wow. So we've got Tyler receiving downloads of information and James experiencing anomalous cognition. It's like there's this recurring theme of human potential being pushed beyond what we thought was possible.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder if there's more to our minds and to the universe than we currently understand.
I'm starting to think so. And it makes me want to learn more.
Me too. Let's dive into James's process for creative problem solving. He has this unique approach where he basically tasks his subconscious mind, which he calls his little elves, to work on a problem overnight.
Little elves. Is that like a metaphor, or does he actually believe in tiny creatures living in his brain?
It's more of a metaphor, I think.
Yeah.
But who knows with all this UFO stuff going on?
True. So what do these little elves do?
Well, James describes it as a way of tapping into a deeper level of creativity, almost like outsourcing a problem to another part of his mind.
Interesting.
And it works.
He says it does. He often wakes up with the answer as if his little elves have been working on it all night.
That's incredible. You know, it kind of reminds me of Tyler and his downloads. It's like they're both accessing this hidden knowledge that's beyond their individual understanding.
That's a great observation. It's like there's this whole other level of reality that we're only just beginning to glimpse. I like that. A whole other level of reality. It definitely feels that way. But how does all of this connect to the everyday world, to people like you and me?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at how technology is changing the way we document and understand UFO phenomena, and how the internet is both a tool for discovery and a potential source of deception.
Okay, I'm ready for part 2. Let's do it.
Great. I'm glad you're on board. It's going to be a wild ride. So we've been talking about these scientists and their experiences. But what about the average person who sees something strange in the sky? How do we know what's real and what's not, especially with all the stuff floating around online?
That's a great question. And it's something Pasulka tackles head-on in this section of the book. She introduces us to Scott Brown, who's this graphic designer and UFO debunker.
A debunker.
Yeah.
So he doesn't believe in UFOs?
Not so fast. He actually does believe in UFOs.
Hmm?
But he's also really good at spotting fakes.
Wait, so he debunks fake UFOs, but he still believes in real ones?
Exactly. He uses his design skills to expose hoaxes and show people how easy it is to manipulate images and videos.
So he's kind of like a gatekeeper trying to make sure only the credible stuff gets through.
I think that's a good way to put it. And his whole approach is really interesting. He had some unexplained experiences himself as a kid, like vivid dreams and sleep paralysis.
That's like James Master. He experienced sleep paralysis too.
Right. It seems to be a common thread among people who are drawn to this topic. But Scott's also really cautious about things like hypnotic regression.
Why is that?
Because he believes it can sometimes create false memories, which can muddy the waters when you're trying to figure out what really happened.
That makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
you need to find that balance between being open-minded and being critical of the evidence.
Absolutely. And Scott seems to have found that balance. He's part of this online app called In the Field.
In the field. What's that?
It's a group of UFO researchers who are really serious about their work. They have strict rules about what kind of evidence they'll accept, and they're all about promoting authentic research.
So it's not just a bunch of people posting blurry photos and saying, look, a UFO.
No, they're actually doing real investigations trying to get to the bottom of these sightings. And it's not always easy.
Especially online, right? There's so much misinformation out there.
Exactly. And that's where the story of Allison Cruz comes in.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about her. She's the one who got harassed online for posting her UFO videos.
Sadly, yeah. She had these really clear videos of some strange objects in the sky. And she did everything right. You know, she documented everything, checked with the FAA, even invested in better equipment.
So she was being really thorough, but people still attacked her.
They did. And it's a reminder that sharing these kinds of experiences, especially online, can be really risky.
It's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah.
You put yourself out there and then suddenly you're a target for all kinds of negativity.
It can be really discouraging. But Allison didn't let it stop her. She kept documenting her sightings, and she started noticing patterns in the object's behavior.
Like what kind of pattern?
She said they would sometimes mimic airplane lights and then suddenly dart off in impossible directions.
It's like they were playing games with her.
Yeah, almost like they were aware of her presence and reacting to her attempts to film them.
That's a little creepy,
Yeah.
but also kind of cool. You
Yeah.
know, like there's this intelligence out there that's aware of us.
It definitely makes you think. And it highlights this tension between technology as a tool for discovery and technology as a source of deception.
Because on one hand, we have these amazing tools for capturing and sharing evidence, but then on the other hand, it's easier than ever to create fakes and spread misinformation.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. And it's up to us to be discerning, to think critically about the information we're consuming.
I think that's a good takeaway from this part of the book. Being aware of the potential for both good and bad when it comes to technology.
Definitely. And it makes me wonder how we make sense of these experiences in a world where the lines between reality and virtuality are becoming more and more blurred.
That's a great question. And it's something we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at the power of narrative and how the stories we tell ourselves shape our beliefs about UFOs.
Okay, I'm ready for part 3. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've talked about the scientists and the experiencers and the challenges of documenting these phenomena. But now I'm curious about how we make sense of it all. How do we fit these strange events into our understanding of the world?
Well, Pasulka brings up this really interesting concept called amplificatory interpretation.
Amplificatory interpretation. Say that 3 times fast.
Right. It's a mouthful. But basically, it means that we try to make sense of the unknown by relating it to familiar stories and symbols. Like, think about ancient myths and legends. They often feature gods and monsters and supernatural events. And those stories help people make sense of the world around them.
So you're saying we're still doing the same thing today, we're just using different stories, like maybe science fiction movies instead of ancient myths?
Exactly. We draw on existing cultural narratives, religious beliefs, even pop culture references to try to understand these unexplained events.
It's like our brains are wired to find patterns and make connections, even if it means stretching the truth a little.
It's not necessarily about stretching the truth, but more about fitting new information into our existing framework of understanding.
And sometimes that framework is based on stories, whether they're true or not.
Right, and Pasulka gives this great example of a guy named David Stinnett who witnessed a UFO and then randomly came across a video that perfectly described what he had seen.
Wow. So it's like the video validated his experience, gave him a way to understand what he had seen.
Exactly, and it highlights how powerful visual imagery can be, especially when it comes to shaping our memories and beliefs.
Makes you wonder if we sometimes see what we expect to see, or what we've been primed to see by the stories we've consumed.
It's definitely possible. And there's a neuroscientist named Jeffrey Zaks who's done a lot of research on this. He's found that we can easily confuse fictional events with real ones, especially when those fictional events are presented in a realistic way.
Like in a documentary or a news report?
Right. Our brains don't always distinguish between what's real and what's imagined, especially when it comes to visual information.
So how does all of this relate to UFOs?
Well, think about all the TV shows and movies about aliens and UFOs. They often present these really compelling narratives, but they're also blurring the lines between fact and fiction.
Like Ancient Aliens, for example.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. They're weaving together ancient myths and archaeological discoveries and eyewitness accounts, but it's all presented in a way that makes it seem like fact, even though a lot of it is speculation.
So it's entertainment disguised as education.
In a way, yeah. And it can be really misleading for people who aren't familiar with the topic.
It's like they're being fed this narrative that aliens have been visiting Earth for centuries, and they're presented with all this evidence, but it's not always clear what's real and what's not.
It's tricky. And it's why critical thinking is so important. Being able to question the information you're being given and not just accepting everything at face value.
And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from Pasulka's book. It's not just about UFOs. It's about how we approach knowledge and information in general.
Exactly. We need to be discerning consumers of information,
Right.
especially in today's world where there's so much content out there.
Right. It's like we're drowning in a sea of information, and it's hard to know what to trust.
And it's not just about information overload. It's also about the way information is presented. The stories we tell, the images we use, the language we choose, it all has an impact on how we perceive the world.
And that brings us to the story of Jediism.
Jediism? You mean like the religion based on Star Wars?
Yep, it might seem like a joke, but there are actually people who identify as Jedi, and they take the principles of the Jedi Order very seriously.
So they believe in the Force and lightsabers and all that?
Not necessarily lightsabers,
Yeah.
but they do believe in the power of the Force, and they try to live their lives according to the Jedi Code.
That's wild. I mean, it's a fictional universe, but it's clearly resonated with people on a deep level.
It has. And it shows how powerful stories can be. They can inspire us, they can challenge us, and they can even shape our beliefs.
And it's not just Star Wars. Think about all the other stories that have shaped our understanding of the world. Religious texts, mythology, literature, even fairy tales. They all contribute to our worldview.
I think it's fascinating how this conversation about the power of narrative has brought us full circle back to the ideas we explored earlier. Tyler receiving downloads of information and James tapping into his subconscious little elves for creative inspiration.
Right. It's like we're constantly searching for meaning and connection, and sometimes those searches lead us to these really unexpected places.
And maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not about finding all the answers, but about embracing the mystery and remaining open to the possibility that there's more to reality than we can currently comprehend.
I like that, embracing the mystery. It's a good way to approach this whole topic because ultimately there are more questions than answers.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the questions that keep us curious and keep us searching.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive today. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the science, the experiences, the stories, and the beliefs. And I hope it's given you some food for thought.
I hope so too. It's a complex and multifaceted topic and there's no easy answers. But I think the most important thing is to keep an open mind and to keep asking questions.
I agree. And to remember that the search for truth is a journey, not a destination.
Well said. So on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of UFOs, technology, and religion. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.